The bow was found only a few hundred yards away from the stern. That revealed a clue. If the ship had broken up on the surface, the stern, which was heavy, would sink quickly, while the bow could drift miles away.
When you find in 4,000 meters of water depth that they are only 600 meters apart, that really is almost categoric proof that they were intact at the surface and the separation came later.
If the Derbyshire did not break up on the surface, what caused her to sink? Perhaps the original finding was correct after all. The ship had simply been overwhelmed by a storm.
I started myself creating mathematically these cyclonic storms and the waves that would come from them. And those waves, I found to my amazement, were 25 to 30 meters high. And this is way beyond the sorts of design heights that we design ships for. And whilst many ships might not experience them in such a storm as this, if it had to be caught in the worst part of the storm, then it has to be able to sustain that.
Again, the photographs would provide the answer. Some of the Derbyshire's hatch covers showed evidence of damage. Did it happen as the ship sank, or did it occur on the surface? On a large cargo ship, hatch covers can weigh up to 30 tons. But weight doesn't mean strength, as investigators would soon discover.
In the deck, the hatch covers occupy 30% of the deck area, and yet their strength is less than 1/10 of that of the rest of the deck. There's such a mismatch there, and it only wants one big wave over 25 meters, and you're absolutely certainly going to burst a hatch cover.
Professor Faulkner concluded it would take only one damaged hatch cover to bring about the loss of this huge ship and 44 lives.
We do expect that the number one hatch will burst through the big wave thumping it, and that'll be all damaged and so on. And then as that compartment fills, the ship is virtually at the point where it's becoming a certain loss, because the whole of the foredeck will be underwater perhaps by as much as 3 meters at that point. Then the number two hatch cover is virtually certain to follow by the next even moderate wave. As soon as number two compartment's gone, then the ship takes a very heavy bow trim and in a matter of less than 3 minutes would be plunging irreversibly into the sea. The captain would have nothing really to say, I'm getting water at the fore end. And so really until you get to the point where the number one hatch cover is burst, and then he would know. But by then he's lifted up in his seat as the bow starts going down, and there's nothing he can do.
There was no time even to send a Mayday. The Derbyshire was an unusual case, especially since it was a new ship, only 4 years old when it sank. The regular disappearance of large freighters, one every 2 months, is the biggest scandal in shipping today. Most lie at the bottom of the sea, the cause of death unknown. The eerie remains of this ship, adrift in the North Atlantic, presented investigators with a bizarre mystery to solve. In January 1998, a 26-year-old freighter, the Flare, was 14 days out of Rotterdam, Holland, bound for Canada. The ship was plowing through stormy seas when it was struck by a towering wave. Within minutes, the ship was dangerously listing to starboard. The crew, mostly Filipinos, told their radio operator, nicknamed Marconi, to send a distress call. At 4:30 a.m., the Coast Guard in Newfoundland picked up a panic-stricken call from the Flare.
What station calling Mayday? This is Stephenville Coast Guard Radio, Channel 16. Say again, over. Please confirm 4657 north, 5651 west. Is that correct, over? How many persons on board, over?
There was no further message. The Canadian Coast Guard assumed the worst and alerted search and rescue services. They had no idea what ship was in trouble or how many lives were at stake. On the flare, the crew thought their mayday had been heard when a ship appeared.
Everyone rejoiced. We said, "There's a boat. There's a rescuer." As it passed by, we saw it was the other half of our ship. We lost all hope.
The stern, which they were standing on, sank immediately, while the bow of the flare began an eerie dance around the North Atlantic. Search and rescue helicopters from Nova Scotia were instructed to fly to the last known position of the flare. But what they didn't know was that in the heat of the moment, the Mayday call had given the Coast Guard the wrong position. The chance of finding the flare and its crew of 25 alive was now remote. But 6 men were still clinging to an overturned lifeboat in the bitter cold.
The wind was very cold. Every time we got wet, we shivered. The waves were big. 2 of our companions were washed away.
The weather was pretty murky. We were kind of having to dodge around snow squalls that were in the area. And we were trying to get back on track. That's when we came across the oil slick on the water. I mean, obviously, we're looking for a boat in trouble. That's a good thing to look for, so we started to track along the slick.
There was nothing we could do. Marconi asked for help. We just looked at him and couldn't help him. Each one of us was helping ourselves.
By following the oil slick, the helicopter spotted the upturned lifeboat. The men had now been in the water for 5 hours.
We said, "We'll live," when we saw the helicopter coming to rescue us. We took turns waving. The others waved, and then I waved.
I thought when I saw them and looked down and see the kind of condition they were in initially was, you poor bastards, but then you realize after a couple of minutes that, you guys are really lucky to be where they are and where we are all at the same time.
Within half an hour, the survivors were on their way to a hospital in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Of the 25-man crew, only 4 survived. Nearly frozen, 2 were barely alive. "15 bodies were recovered, including the radio operator, Marconi. The 6 others were never found.
On our second search, we found the bow section and started to fly around that, and it was probably one of the most eerie things I've ever seen. From the front, it looked like a perfectly good ship, and then it's just completely torn in half. It was just huge.
The flare was now a ghost ship haunting the North Atlantic. Tormenting investigators from Canada's Transportation Safety Board, it sank before they had time to arrive. The flare slipped silently beneath the waves with all its vital secrets, except one. Now at the bottom of the sea, the flare had left no black box and no clues to why it sank. Investigators would have to rely on the latest technology to find out what happened.